Hey guys, what's up? This is Matrix Ninja bringing you a mastery guide video. Masteries are really important, and I see a lot of people get to higher levels and not even touch them. And masteries can really help you out in the early game, and can be the difference between winning a lane and losing a lane. So they're very important. You have points to spend on your each mastery page, which you can have up to 20, and you get a point equal to your level. So level 1, you're gonna have 1 point to spend. Level 30, you'll have 30. The masteries are split up into 3 trees. You have the offensive tree oriented around doing damage, defensive tree oriented around not taking as much damage, and utility oriented around things that are not offensive or defensive, just like movement speed or mana regen. I'm going to go over each mastery point to help you guys understand what they do. The more points you put in something, the more effect it has. So rank 1, it only has 1.25 cooldown reduction, but at rank 4, it has 5% cooldown reduction. So the more points you put into each area, the stronger it gets. So double-edged sword, you deal an initial 2% damage and receive 1% damage, or if your range is 1.5 and 1.5. Double-edged sword is generally best on bruisers who have that health pool to be able to take that additional 1% damage, because it can stack up, but also need that additional 2% damage to be more effective in fights. So this is generally best on bruisers, usually AD, but you have Fury, which is usually taken on auto attack reliant champions, such as like AD carries or just AD oriented champions. It increases your attack speed, so you get more auto attacks off, which increases your damage output. You have Sorcery, which increases cooldown reduction, which allows you to have your spells up faster and use them more often. It's best used on champions like Vladimir or Ziggs, or champions that you need your abilities up to do a lot of damage. So it's good to have those abilities up more often to be able to put out more damage. Butcher, basic attacks and single target spells deal additional 2 damage to minions and monsters. So this helps for getting minions early game, so you have more damage to actually kill the minion and get the last hit to get the gold. It's just helpful in that type of area. It's usually good on any type of champion, as long as you're in a solo lane, like not support. So it's pretty good. You have Expose Weakness. Damaging an enemy with a spell increases allied champions' damage to that enemy by 1% for the next 3 seconds. This is good on champions that have a lot of AoE, like Ziggs or Vladimir, people that can do a lot of damage, or not even a lot of damage, but do damage to a lot of champions, so that way your team is more effective against them. Brute Force just increases your attack damage per level, so the more points you put into it, the more damage at level 18. It's just good on any really AD or physical damage champion. It's just a good thing to have on like bruisers or AD carries. Mental Force is basically the same thing as Brute Force, except for AP or ability power. So it's just good for mages or sometimes AP assassins. You have Feast, which when you kill a unit, you restore 3 health and 1 mana. It's good on really anyone who needs that kind of sustain. So you can just farm and get that sustain from it. However, it's a mastery point that does fall off really hard, because you do not need that late game at all. So I usually avoid taking it, because it's sometimes not worth the early game. It's not worth sacrificing another point. Spell Weaving, damaging an enemy champion with a basic attack increases spell damage by 1%, stacking up to 3 times. This is for champions that use auto attacks between their spells, usually mages. So like people like Vladimir sometimes take this, or they can use a spell and then they auto attack in the meantime. Nidalee will take this because she uses spells and then can auto attack in between them. It's just good for champions that have pretty low cooldowns and can just use an ability and then auto attack, and use an ability and auto attack, and keep weaving in their auto attacks. Material Mastery is it just gives you base AD, so it's good for the early game, in early game trades with AD champions, or for CSing minions. Arcane Mastery is basically the same thing as Material Mastery, but for AP. Executioner, increased damage dealt to champions below 20% health by 5%. This is good for champions, for bruisers with executes, or just people with executes. Like Lee Sin has an execute on a second Q. Nidalee has an execute. Elise has an execute. These work really, really well with those champions. It's also good for assassins or just other high damage champions where duels can get pretty intense, and so you need that extra 5% or 10% or whatever it gets up to. Blade Weaving, damaging an enemy champion with a spell increases base attack damage by 1%, stacking up to 3 times. It's basically the opposite of Spell Weaving. So if you get this, so champions that need Spell Weaving usually get Blade Weaving as well. So that way they have the reverse effect. So when you auto attack a champion, your spells get stronger. Then when you use a spell, your auto attacks get stronger. And when you auto attack with that empowered auto attack, your spells get stronger. And it just kind of like bounces back and forth to help your champion out with your damage. Warlord just increases your bonus attack damage by 2%, increasing to up to 6%, I think. This is good just in general for AD champions who like to go offensive. It's just a pretty good mastery point for offensive physical champions. Archmage is the same thing, basically, just as Warlord, just for AP. Dangerous Game is a cool mastery. Whenever you kill a champion kills and assists, restore 5% of missing health and mana. What this does is there's a spell called Ignite, and it just does damage over time. So it's Dangerous Game is really good for that, to counter that spell specifically. Because if you get in a really, really close fight and they ignite you and you're able to kill them just barely, you'll increase that health to maybe be able to live through the ignite. So it's a good thing for skirmishes or duels to try to not go 1-for-1 instead of just get a free kill. Frenzy, critical hits grant 5% attack speed for 3 seconds, and it stacks up to 3 times. So this is really good for champions that have crit chance, like Gangplank or Yasuo, or just champions that have crit, that when you use it, or when you get that crit, your attack speed increases, so you can crit more often, it can stack. So it's really good on champions like that. Devastating Strike just increases your armor and magic penetration. It's just good to take on either AP or AD champions because it does armor and magic pen. So it's just a good item to take in general. It also really helps with CSing early game if you're an AP champion with low auto attack damage, because it helps get through that armor on the minions and you deal more damage, which helps you CS. Arcane Blade basic attacks also deal bonus magic damage equal to 5% of your ability power. This is a really good mastery on people like Teemo or other champions like Ziggs, Orianna, champions that when they use their abilities, they still like to auto attack a lot in between. So they can do a lot of damage when they build lots of AP with just their auto attacks. So Arcane Blade plus Blade Weaving, Spell Weaving is really good for AP duels. Havoc just plus 3% increased damage. It's just good for all types of champions that want to do a lot of damage for AP, AD, whatever. It just increases your damage. It's just a good mastery point to have. Into the defensive tree, we have Block, which reduces incoming damage from basic attacks by 1, get to 2. This is good for if you're in bot lane, like an AD carry or support, where a lot of the damage in that lane is purely done by auto attacks. It can really help because if you're reducing that damage, you're obviously taking less damage than the enemy if they did not take this point with this mastery. So it's a good thing to put in if you're facing against an AD champion. Recovery, plus 1 health per 5 seconds, it can stack. It's good for lanes. It's just a good defensive point because even if you're going for mainly offensive, you can get like 21 points in here just to reach this. And then you can go 9 in the defensive tree, which is a good thing to do. But this recovery thing, a recovery mastery point, is good for if you take a bad trade or something and you get zoned from the wave a little bit. The health regen helps you kind of just sustain back up to the point where you can go back into lane. So it's a good point to take. Enchanted armor increases your bonus armor and magic resist by 2.5%. It's good on tanks that build a lot of armor and magic resist, so it can amplify it even more. It's generally not the best thing to take on like AD carries or assassins where you don't build a lot of defensive stats. Tough Skin reduces damage taken from neutral monsters by 1. This mastery point is only taken on junglers. If you take it on a laner, it does nothing until you farm jungle creeps. It's a horrible point to take unless you are a jungler, in which case it's really needed. Unyielding. For melee, reduce all incoming damage from champions by 2. Reduce all incoming damage from champions by 1 if you're ranged. This is a good thing to take if you are like in a melee versus ranged matchup, or even just in a ranged versus ranged matchup. It's generally not the best point to take if you're the ranged person in a melee versus ranged matchup, because they're rarely getting, you're usually poking them down. It's a decent thing to take, though, just in case if they are able to get onto you and do their damage. Veteran Scar just increases your health. It gets up to like 36 or something like that. It's just good for the early game if you're trying to be a tanky champion or have that extra health to win duels in lane. It's a pretty good defensive mastery. Bladed armor is basically just like advanced tough skin. Taking basic attacks from neutral monsters causes them to bleed physical damage monsters equal to 1% of their current health each second. This doesn't work against lane minions, so do not take this if you're a top laner or mid laner or AD carry or anything, because it will be absolutely useless. But in jungle, it's a good thing to increase your clear speed. Oppression, reduce damage taken by 3% from enemies that have impaired movement, slow, snares, taunts, etc. This is good to take if you're like Singed, building Rylai's, or someone who has a lot of CC, or your team has a lot of CC. Because if you're able to constantly be slowing that enemy, or constantly be knocking up, or slowing, or taunting, or whatever, if you're Shen taunting, it just reduces the damage taken, so overall your team is taking less damage, which is a good thing to have in team fights or late game fights. Juggernaut just increases your maximum health by 3%. This is a good thing to take with this. It doesn't really necessarily increase it that much, but it is a good thing to have, especially if you're taking this, you're probably going into the defense, or you're probably getting tanky a little bit. It's a great thing to take on Shen or other champions where health is a big deal. Hardness just increases your armor. I think it gets up to 6. This is good if you're going against an AD lane, such in top lane if they have a heavy AD bruiser type of thing like Lee Sin or Aurelia, or just other champions that have a lot of AD damage. It's a good thing to take just to reduce their damage early game. Resistance is basically hardness just with magic resist instead of armor. It's good against AP laners or mages that you're playing against. Evasive reduces damage taken by 4%, or reduces damage taken by 4% from area effect damage or magic damage. So this is a good mastery point to take if you're against like a Ziggs or Vladimir, or just someone who does a lot of area effect damage, because it can stack up. So it's a good thing to take if you're in those type of lanes. Reinforced armor reduces the total damage taken from critical strikes by 10%. This is a good mastery point to take if you're against like Tryndamere or Yasuo, someone who crits a lot. So that 10% reduction really stacks up over time in brawls or skirmishes, or just in lane. Swiftness reduces the effectiveness of slows by 10%. This is a good thing to take just in general if you're going hard into the defensive tree. It reduces the effectiveness of slows, obviously, so if you're going deep into the enemy team and trying to make an escape and people are trying to slow you, this mastery point could be the difference between life or death. So it's a good point to take just in case. Perseverance regenerates 0.35% of missing health every 5 seconds. I think it stacks up to like 1.5 or something like that. Pretty strong. This is a great point to take on Mundo or other really high health champions. So it actually is regening a lot over those 5 seconds. It's just a good point to take if you're going hard into the defensive tree and think you might be against high poke champions, or you need that extra sustain. Second Wind increases self-healing, health regen, lifesteal, and spell vamp by 10% when below 25% health. This is a great point to take if you're like Mundo or Shen, or even high lifesteal champions like Lee Sin or Aurelia, because once you get the lower health you get, once you drop past that point, you become harder to kill. So you can be deceptively tanky or deceptively strong when you really shouldn't be. And you can bait a lot of fights and get a lot of kills because of it. A Legendary Guardian, +1 armor, and 0.5 magic resist for each nearby enemy champion. This is kind of poopy, in my opinion. I don't like it a lot because it's just a point that is purely dependent on whether or not you are outnumbered, type of thing. So it's good on good on team fights, like if you're Malphite and you just like jump in there, or you're Wukong and you're like all up in their face. It's a pretty good point to take in that situation. But I don't know. I usually play a lot of like anti carries or high damage bruisers, where I usually just jump into the back line to go for the 80 carry. So I'm generally not surrounded by a lot of enemy champions, so I tend to not take this point. But it's good to take if you're like Shen or Wukong or Malphite, really getting up in the enemy's face. Runic Blessing. Start the game with a 50 health shield. The shield regenerates each time after respawning. This is not that good. This shield maybe blocks one auto attack from like Rise early game, and then it's just done until you like die or recall or whatever. It's not worth it. It's not worth the point. So it really doesn't help you out. It's decent, I guess, for early game trades if you're like Yasuo maybe, where you already have a built-in shield, or Malphite, or just increases that shield before they can even get to your health in the first place. Or it can be, I guess, decent, but generally it's not very good. Tenacious reduces the duration of crowd control effects by 15%. This is awesome. If you're a tank getting all up in their face, and they try to like stun you or snare you or try to like lock you down so you can't do anything, like if you have a high CC tank, this really helps break through their CC and then use your own and try to lock down the enemy team yourself. So this is a really good point to take if you're going hard into the defensive tree and you just want to make it to that 21. It's a good thing to take. Reduces the cast time of recall by 1 second. This is, I never really know when to take this. It's an okay okay mastery point, but I don't know if it's really worth the missing mastery point for putting it in there. I generally don't take it, but I guess it can be useful. This fleet, it gets up to 1.5 movement speed. That's good when you're. It's just great on champions like Yasuo, where their movement speed helps stack their shields faster, or junglers, where they want to be more efficient from running between camp to camp or ganking lanes. It's a really good point to take if you're ever thinking about going into the utility tree. This is basically core. Meditation increases your mana regen. It's good on really high mana demanding champions. Otherwise, it's not really that great. If you're a support who has like high poke, like Lulu or something, I would definitely take this point because it can help your mana regen a lot, so you can use that poke more often. And if you have like Spellblade or whatever, where whenever you do damage to an enemy champion with an ability or auto attack, you get gold from it. It's a good thing to have, so those long range abilities can get you gold, and it can help a lot. Increase the cast range of trinket items by 15%. This is a good item. This really helps for if you're trying to like ward from Dragon Pit into Tribush, which is a really difficult thing to do. It's just great to take on just supports. It's not really that awesome of an item, or that awesome of a mastery point for different types or for other champions besides that. But it is very good on supports if you're planning on playing that. Summoner's Insight reduces the cooldowns of summoner spells by 4%. This is good for if you're a support and you're trying to have exhaust up more often or heal for your AD carry. It's also good if you're a jungler and you take like Ghost or something like Udyr. It's good to take on that. It's just a good mastery point to take if you're going into the utility tree. Strength of Spirit, +1 health regen per 5 seconds for every 300 maximum mana. This is a good thing on like Singed. It used to be absolutely core on Singed when he used to go 21 to the utility tree when he was like proxy Singed. It's a good thing to get on champions that build like Frozen Heart or Frozen Gauntlet, or items that build mana and resist, because then that mana can help you increase your health regen, which can help you in brawls and just lane sustain in general. Increases the duration of potions and elixirs by 10%. This is a good thing to have if you're a really, really horrible early game jungler who has bad sustain, or like a support in like a high poke type of lane where you need the extra pot duration to help sustain through the poke. It's just a good mastery point to take if you're a support or possibly jungle. Culinary mastery, or master. Health pots are upgraded into biscuits that restore an additional 20 health and 10 mana instantly upon consumption. This is good for champions like Lulu or Blitzcrank, or champions that have those mana problems or health problems if you're getting poked down. It's just a great thing to take on supports. If you're going support, this is generally key. You can take it on junglers, but it's not really that effective. Vampirism increases lifesteal and spell vamp. I think it gets up to 3%. This is great on I guess junglers is generally what you would use it on. Junglers like Akali, especially, like not many Akali junglers are actually played, but people who have hybrid damage, like maybe Evelynn. This would be good on Evelynn if you're trying to go into that utility tree. It's just a good thing to take for that jungle sustain. Runic Affinity increase the duration of Shrine, Relic, Quest, and neutral monster buffs for 20%, or by 20%. This is good on junglers, for when you take that early red buff or blue buff, it can help you keep them for longer to have more effect on the game because you have those buffs. It's also good to take occasionally on mid laners if you're confident that you're getting blue buff, such as your jungler is Lee Sin or Riven or someone who does not need it. And that's a good thing to take. Greed. 0.5 gold every 10 seconds. I think it gets up to 1.5, I'm pretty sure. Might get up to 2, but I'm not sure. But this is a good item to take on supports. Supports generally need it a lot because they're not farming those minions, so they can fall behind in gold pretty fast. So that gold per 10 really helps out. Scavenger, +1 gold each time an ally kills a nearby lane minion. This is great for if you are support, and I only take it on support. It's good because while you're sitting in lane, protecting your AD carry as he farms, you're getting gold every time he farms. So it's just good. You just get a little bit of gold from when your AD carry is farming well. It's just a good item to take on support. I generally always take it. Wealth. You increase your starting gold by 40. This I also take on support because you generally are buying wards from first start, and you need that extra gold to be able to stack up on pots or different items that you might need that you wouldn't normally be able to afford with your starting 475 gold. So it's a really good item to take on supports, and really only supports. Expanded Mind increases, or plus 2% increased maximum mana. This also used to be really good on Singed. I take it on champions, like sometimes jungler if you're going really hard into the utility tree, but generally like supports that you sometimes build mana once you get later on in the game, or champions that have a pretty high base mana pool later on in the game if you're support, or sometimes jungle. It's just a good thing to take. Inspiration, +5 experience, +5 experience every 10 seconds while near a higher level allied champion. This is good if you're a support and you leave lane for a while to go ward, or you back to get a pink so that way you have dragon control or something, and you lose out on experience. And while you're standing next to your AD carry, he's high level because he's been sitting in lane, you're getting that experience to try to catch up. So this is it's a good point to take if you're support. Bandit melee grants plus 15 gold on champion kill or assist. A range grants 3 gold every time an enemy champion is attacked. This cannot trigger on the same champion more than once every 5 seconds. This is a great thing to take on champions that are on supports that have poke, and I only take it on supports. If you're a champion like Lulu or Morgana, or just some champions that have higher ranged attacks, it can help stack gold, which really helps for not falling too far behind because you're support and not farming. I do always take this on supports. Intelligence plus 2% cooldown reduction, or reduces the cooldowns of activated items by 4%. This is sometimes a good thing to take on supports if you have like I cannot remember them, like Face of the Mountain or other active abilities that help your team out. That's a good thing to take because then you can use them more often. You can be more effective in team fights because you don't have that damage to really help out. Wanderer plus 5% movement speed out of combat. This is you just have to take that if you're going at least have like sort of into the utility tree, like I'd say over 10 or 11 points, because it's really, really helpful if you're like a jungler or if you're a support walking back to lane after backing or type of thing. It's just always helpful in basically any situation. So as long as you've already gone into that utility tree, it's a good point to take. So those have been all the mastery points. Because you can have 20 pages and you can also name them, you can make a mastery page for, let's say, like an AD carry and set it to what you want. And then when you start a game, you can switch your masteries to that specific page, so you don't have to redo them every game. But it's good to redo them if you're like in ranked or draft pick, where you can see the enemy you're playing against, so that way you don't take a bunch of armor when you're against Ziggs or something. So it's good to customize them if you can, if you already know what lane you're going to be in. Another good thing to know is to get to the last point in each section, it requires 21 points. So a lot of base masteries is like 2190 or 2109 or 9210 or different types of things. It usually goes to the trees as intervals of 21 and 9. However, there are exceptions like 3000 for like really high damage hybrid carries and stuff like that. But generally, I like to just run 2190 or the 21-9 type of thing because it helps with your defense and lots of offense, or helps with your offense when you're going heavily into defense. It's just a good thing to take to help better round your champion. And that's generally the best thing to do. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this helped out. If you liked it or learned something, please like, subscribe, or comment on what you want to see. That would really help out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.